So before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that the offices of the Canada Council for the Arts are located in Ottawa on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. The Council recognizes the Algonquins as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory and uphold and uplift the voice and values of our host nation. The Council also respects and affirms the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across this land. It has and will continue to honor the commitments to self-determination and sovereignty we have made to Indigenous nations and peoples. Furthermore, the Council acknowledges the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and fervently believes the arts contribute to healing and decolonizing journey we all share together. And on that theme of sharing, we invite you also to reflect on the land on which you live and work, the nation it belongs to, and how you can acknowledge that in your own way, either as an organization or as individuals. This can be done through engagement, knowledge sharing, and like today, acknowledgement. It is important to be open and engaged with the many nations of this land. So as many of you know, the Canada Council for the Arts is proud to be Canada's public arts funder. The Council contributes to the vibrancy of a creative and diverse arts and literary scene. So we will be sharing a PDF version of this presentation to all registered attendees in a few days. For those people who have registered and haven't and are not here, they'll also be receiving the presentation. So if any of your colleagues or friends are not able to join, you can tell them that they'll receive the presentation anyhow. The chat and question and answer function has been disabled for the duration of this presentation due to the limitation of time and how much we want to cover. So if you do have questions, you are welcome to contact the International Residencies team by clicking the help button in the updated portal. It's also important to note that the information in these slides is accurate at the time of delivery, but may be updated as new considerations arise. For the most current details on programs and related processes, please consult Canada Council's website and a list of resources. So today, we'll be covering information on program and funding opportunities. We'll be discussing what has changed when it comes to the Arts Across Canada and Abroad program and the International Residencies funding opportunity. We'll go over who can apply and what you can apply for, and discuss examples of eligible expenses. We'll also talk about how applications are assessed in the International Residencies component and go over the assessment criteria. We'll discuss the things you'll need to prepare before submitting your application, and we'll be sharing some best practices. Lastly, we'll be taking a virtual field trip through the updated application form. If you're looking for information about navigating the updated portal, that training is available separately on the guidance and resources page on our website. We will be sharing more resources at the end of this presentation to help you navigate things as well. So what's new? So previously, the Arts Across Canada and Arts Abroad programs were two separate programs. One focused on supporting national activities and the other focused on international activities. As a result, applicants had to separate their Canadian and international activities and apply for separate funding. These programs have now been merged into one program called Arts Across Canada and Abroad that funds both national and international activities, leading to a more streamlined and flexible application process with reduced administrative burden and confusion for applicants. The grants that are most impacted by this change are the representation and promotion component, circulation and touring, and microgrants. Microgrants is a brand new funding opportunity at Council that will fund travel and professional development activities and has replaced the travel and professional development grants. We will be hosting a webinar in early October on this new funding opportunity, so be sure to register. The International Residencies component funds activities linked to international artistic and cultural exchanges for Canadian artists, arts workers, artistic groups, and artistic organizations of at least 5 consecutive days. Funding supports creative research and creation, and it must include networking activities within the context of a residency abroad. In other words, this component supports eligible applicants with a confirmed residency of at least 5 consecutive days outside of Canada, hosted by an organization to undertake research and creation projects that include networking activities. One change to point out that is different from before is that let me start again. So one thing to point out is that previously, in order to be eligible, your residency needed to be at least 1 week. Now the minimum duration is 5 consecutive days. So who can apply? The profiles that are eligible for this component are Canadian artists and arts workers, Canadian artistic groups, and Canadian artistic organizations. More information on each of these new profiles is available on the Creating Your Applicant Profile page on our website. Please be sure to review this information carefully, especially if you are a first-time applicant. So what can you apply for? To apply for this funding opportunity, you must have received an official invitation or confirmation to participate in an international residency of at least 5 consecutive days. As discussed, the residency must take place abroad. If you do not have an invitation, or if the residency is taking place in Canada, consider applying to the artistic creation component of the Explore and Create program. This component is also intended for residencies focused primarily on individual or independent creation. It is important to really underline that the International Residencies component supports research and creation projects that include networking activities, where you develop international relationships and opportunities with others. Therefore, if you are an individual, group, or organization that wishes to organize its own residency program or obtain funding to invite artists from abroad to participate in its residencies, this component does not apply to your situation. The maximum grant amount per application is $20,000. So as before, an application may include more than 1 residencies. And you must keep in mind that it does not affect, and if you do this, it doesn't affect your maximum amount that you can receive per application. The maximum amount that you can receive is still $20,000 per application. So let's talk about eligible expenses. We have included here some of the most common expenses listed in applications. This is not an exhaustive list, but it does give you a good idea. You can include travel costs, per diem and accommodations, registration fees, personal costs related to the residency. Previously, you could not request subsistence up to a maximum amount. This line item has been removed, and the maximum amount has also been removed. It has been replaced with a line item called Artists and Professional Fees, Cultural Participant Fees, or Compensation or Personal Costs. This is essentially how much you are paying yourself or others for the residency-related work. It's important to be realistic in your request and keep in mind that you may not receive a full amount requested. Additionally, as noted, there is a separate per diem and accommodation line item. This is where you will include an amount for food and incidentals while you are abroad. And very quickly, a note about direct costs related to the project. So as mentioned, this grant covers most expenses directly related to a residency abroad. So this may include artist fees and professional fees if your project includes collaboration with others, as well as presentation costs. So framing, installation, space rental, for example, if an exhibition or presentation is planned as part of the residency. So when to submit your application? You may submit your application anytime before the start of the residency, but no later than the day before your departure. You must submit your application before this date to be eligible. It's important to note that for a temporary period of time, Council is allowing applicants to apply for retroactive expenses. As the portal was inaccessible recently, we will accept retroactive expenses incurred between March 26th and November 26th, 2025 on an exceptional basis. If your residency began during this period, even if it has already ended, you can still submit an application. If you missed the October 22nd deadline, you can still submit an application for retroactive funding to the following deadline. So note that for this component, the evaluation and processing of applications only begins after the deadline, and results are generally communicated up to 6 months after the deadline, not from the day that your application was submitted. Therefore, if you submit your application well before the deadline, it will take longer to receive your results. So how are decisions made? So after a deadline or cutoff, applications are organized into groups for peer assessment committees. Peer assessment is the basis for most of the Canada Council's funding decisions. It ensures integrity, transparency, and inclusiveness. Some components, like international residencies, are assessed by external peer assessors, and others are internally assessed. Peer assessors are selected based on the type of application we receive, and a new committee is put together for every competition. Peer assessors are invited by program officers and are approved by directors. They are selected based on experience, expertise, and location. Peer assessors evaluate and score applications against the assessment criteria. They discuss and work together to agree on a ranked list of applications, and they are paid for their time reading applications and participating in committee meetings. If you would like to become a peer reviewer, you can self-nominate through your portal account. Applications for this component are evaluated according to 3 criteria: relevance, impact, and feasibility. Over the next 3 slides, you'll see an overview of each of the assessment criteria. Each criterion includes 3 sub-criteria. And I won't spend too much time on the sub-criteria and diving deep into examples, but what you'll see later on in the presentation is useful information section in the application form, and that goes into some more details about what each question is looking for and how it relates to the assessment criteria. So I want to highlight 2 things about the assessment criteria right now. So first, the sub-criteria first, the sub-criteria. Note that your score for each criterion is calculated based on the results obtained for each of the sub-criteria. And second, the minimum score. This is the threshold you must achieve from the peer assessor scores to be eligible for consideration for funding. It does not mean you automatically receive a grant. Our program budget context will ultimately determine how many grants we can award. However, if you meet or exceed this threshold, your application can be considered. So let's look at relevance. There are 3 sub-criteria. Here, we want you to think about the artistic quality of your previous work and how it might relate to your chosen residency. Consider this point when you are selecting your support material. This sub-criteria is out of 15. Second is the rationale for your project. For example, why does this residency need to be in Mexico as opposed to somewhere else closer to home? You'll want to explain why you have chosen a particular location and how it relates to your larger project. This sub-criteria is out of 15. And finally, we want you to demonstrate to us how this project is suitable and timely with regard to your arts practice and your career. This sub-criteria is out of 10. You must obtain a score of 35 out of 50 to be considered for a grant, a minimum score of 35 out of 50. So next we have impact. So again, you'll see that there are 3 sub-criteria, and each of these sub-criteria are out of 10. So here we are looking at the potential for the project to develop and enhance your international profile and Canadian arts practice, build international connections and exchange knowledge, and generate future opportunities. Impact is really about addressing how this opportunity is going to have a positive influence on your practice as an artist or arts worker. Your residency must include opportunities in which you will be networking and exchanging knowledge with other artists or members of the arts community. The minimum score your application must receive is 15 out of 30. And finally, feasibility. Again, there are 3 sub-criteria. So we have the suitability and involvement of the host. Here you might want to talk about where the residency is and why you've chosen to go there. Is it reputable? Are the hosts providing you with anything while you're there? Information like that is what we're looking for here, and this sub-criteria is out of 10. Next is the capacity and experience you and your host have to undertake this project. So ask yourself the question, does this residency have a proven history of hosting a residency program? So this is out of 5. And finally, a reasonable budget, which Caroline is going to talk to you about later in the presentation. And this is also out of 5. The threshold for this criterion is 10 out of 20. So that's all for me today. And now Caroline will talk to you about what to prepare before you submit. Then she'll take you on a virtual tour of the new application form. Thank you.
Thanks, Tish. So what is needed to apply? In order to apply for the International Residencies grant, you'll need to prepare the following: your answers to the application questions, a balanced and reasonable budget, examples of past work, as well as your supporting documents. So if relevant, you can also include optional supporting material. So I'm going to take you on a virtual walk through the application form to give you a sense of what you can expect. Do be aware that the application form is now available and open in our portal, so you can start working on your next application as early as today, ahead of our next deadline, which is October 22nd. As we move through each section, I will offer some practical advice to consider. This is the page that will appear when you log into your new Canada Council portal. To view a list of all the grants and prizes, click on the Browse Funding Opportunities header in the blue box. Once you're on the Funding Opportunities page, you'll identify and select which grant you're interested in applying for. You can do this by scrolling the pages or by using the search and filter section in the left-hand corner. Once you find International Residencies, you'll click on it and it'll take you to the next page. So this is a page where you'll find important information about the deadline, about the purpose of the grant, as well as a checklist of 4 items you'll need to prepare and complete sequentially as shown in the order above. So the first thing you'll do is review your account information. You will self-identify if you wish, if you belong to any of the council's strategic priority groups. You will complete your applicant profile, and then you'll get started on the application form, which includes your budget form. Once you've arrived at the application form, you will go through the following 10 steps. So these steps may vary depending on the responses to the questions, but they can also vary from component to component because at the Canada Council. So do be aware of that. Starting with step 1, here you'll be required to include basic information about your project. So that could include the name that you're going to give to your application, as well as a short summary of your proposed project. You will also need to select your field of practice, so music, visual arts, etc. The type of activity you're proposing, as well as your project start and end dates. You'll notice in the right-hand column, or you'll notice to the right that there is a column entitled Helpful Information. This section now replaces the separate guidelines document that were available for download from our website. This section brings together key information on eligible expenses, assessment criteria, as well as tips and tricks and considerations for when answering the questions. It will be visible at every step of the application process, providing you with new information corresponding with each section. So I encourage you to refer to this column regularly. For the second step, called Residency Overview, you'll need to indicate the type of activities, the location of your residency, and once again, your project start and end dates. Once you reach the third step, activity description, you'll need to describe the proposed activities. So this is really the first narrative portion of the application. And again, the useful information section can help guide you on what to include in your answer. Here, you will explain the purpose of the project, why you chose this particular residency, and how it will benefit your artistic journey and career. You will also specify what you plan to do there and what you hope to gain from this residency. Now that you've completed the activity description section, you'll move more to the respectful and ethical cultural and artistic practices step, where you'll need to indicate whether or not your project includes the participation of intellectual property, cultural knowledge of Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, Métis individuals, or communities. If you answer no to these questions, you will move directly to the next step of the application. If you answer yes to these questions, text boxes will appear and you'll be asked to provide additional information. Your answers to these questions will become an important part of the application and the evaluation. As indicated in the useful information column, you'll be asked to demonstrate that you've taken steps to foster genuine and respectful interactions with participants from these communities, including respect for Indigenous protocols, principles, and intellectual property. If you fail to demonstrate these points, your application may be unsuccessful. So it's very important, these questions. As we've discussed earlier in this presentation, impact is one of the most important criteria in the assessment of your application. So this section is really important in demonstrating to the peer assessors how this opportunity will contribute to raising your international profile within your practice and artistic community, how it will establish connections and promote knowledge exchanges, as well as generate future opportunities for yourself. Once you've completed the impact section, you'll arrive to the sixth step, the activity timeline. So here you'll need to explain the project timeline. This is where you will be asked to identify different stages of the project that will help you meet the deadline and achieve your objectives. This is also where the peer assessors will get a better sense of your work plan for the duration of your residency. So the project timeline should be as detailed as possible based on the information you have at the time of application. You'll notice again the useful information column section. So we state here which evaluation criteria is relevant to this section. This can help you tailor your answers to the evaluation criteria presented earlier and understand how they will be scored. Okay. So with the activity plan and activity timeline now completed, you'll move on to the seventh step where you will start to fill out the budget. So one of the main changes to the international residencies component concerns the new budget. This is now integrated directly into the application form. This means you will no longer be preparing Excel files. The budget must represent the entire project. So all expenses and income related to your residency project, not just the portion that you're requesting funding for from the Canada Council. Note that the system will allow you to enter an amount of your choice. So it's important to remember that under this grant, you're only eligible to request a maximum of $20,000. Do not request more than this amount. Otherwise, it could affect your feasibility score, since a budget that indicates an international residencies grant greater than the maximum allowable may no longer be considered viable. Your budget must be realistic, clear, consistent, and balanced. It must accurately reflect your project, so be sure to provide the peer assessors with sufficient information. Keep in mind the peers, who are artists themselves, will be able to spot exaggerated amounts or omitted essential expenses, which could harm your application. Make good use of the budget notes section to help contextualize certain budget lines and amounts. The useful information section will remind you of limits and maximum amounts, but also provide you with information on eligible expenses. To move forward in the process, you'll click the Complete Budget button. You'll see the integrated project budget form appear. So you'll see also that there'll be a tab for revenues and a tab for expenses, and you can toggle back and forth as you're working on your budget form. We recommend that you start with the expenses and that you fill in the initial amount column for all expenses and revenue. So you will need to fill out this column for expenses and revenues. As previously mentioned, you can include other sources. No, well, rather, as in the past, you can include other sources of funding. So this could be personal contributions or other sources of public funding. It's not mandatory. However, if your total expenses exceed the Canada Council International Residencies grant, it'll be important to specify where your other sources of funding are coming from. The last column in the budget is your notes, your budget notes. So do be sure to utilize this often, providing detailed information to help the peers understand your budget. The middle column is reserved for project updates and final reports, which is only useful after a grant has been awarded. You must fill in the appropriate budget lines for your project with the amounts and budget notes. So if certain budget lines do not apply to your budget or to your project, leave them blank. You don't have to fill those out. A table summarizing the total amounts can be found at the bottom of the page, which we'll see in a moment in the next slide. So in this summary, you will find the total income and the total expenses, as well as the net surplus or deficit, if there is any. It's important to know that the total income and total expenses must be identical. So they must be zero. There can be no surplus or deficit in your budget when applying. Okay, so once you've completed your budget, you'll move on to the last details section of the application, where you can mention any useful information not covered in the other sections of the application. This section is intended for communicating additional context about your project, for example, the artist you're working with, or specific needs related to the proposed activities. It should not be used to supplement your answers to the previously asked questions. So now that you've completed most of the application, you have reached the ninth step, where you will need to provide supporting documentation. So here you will need to upload your files directly to the system or provide links along with a short description of each file or link. For artistic works, you must also include relevant details such as the title, the media, the year, duration, etc. When it comes to mandatory documents, you must include the following. So you must include your CV, which should focus on your experience in the arts and culture sector and be no more than 3 pages. For groups and collectives, include 1 CV per member. You'll also be required to upload your letter of invitation confirming your participation in an international residency, as well as a document containing additional information about your host organization. You must also include at least 1 example of artistic material, so previous artistic examples or examples of previously completed work. For cultural workers, you can include examples of previous work. Your examples should be directly related to the project and the type of work that you're intending to do while on residency. So for example, if your experience has previously been ceramic, but you're wanting to move into painting, the jurors are going to want to see examples of how you paint, not your ceramic work. So making sure that it's relevant to your proposed project. If relevant, you may also include optional supporting documents. So this could be letters of confirmation from participants in your project. But again, these are optional and only if relevant to your project. It's important to keep in mind that the peers have limited time, about 10 minutes, to review supporting documents. So it is therefore really essential to submit a carefully prepared application that accurately represents you. Finally, you've arrived at the final step, the declaration. So here you will end the application with your declaration that confirms everything written in this list that you see. You'll confirm that everything you've included in the application is, to the best of your knowledge, correct. That if you're applying on behalf of someone else, you have the authorization, and that you understand the responsibilities for funding if the application is awarded. I'd like to share with everyone some best practices. So, your answers should really be clear, complete, and concise. They should be as well written as possible. So, a few mistakes, they won't ruin your chances, but a text filled with mistakes may impact the assessor's ability to understand or experience the proposed project. Stay away from brief or vague statements because these really create more questions than answer, leaving the peers with uncertainty about your project. It is possible the peers will not be familiar with you, your practice, or the residency you're proposing. So be sure to provide them with all the information they need to understand what you're doing, why it needs to be at this time in your practice and career, and at this particular residency, as well as how you're going to successfully achieve this project. Make sure that this is the right funding opportunity for you. If it is, as you're writing your answers, remember to keep the assessment criteria in mind. This is really what the peers are using to assess your application. So it's really important to speak to those criterions. Your audience is the panel of peer assessors who are assessing your application. They are artists like yourself with experience going on international residencies. So use language that is appropriate for this audience. And then finally, as much as possible, please contact us as early as possible and as far in advance of the deadline if you have questions. In the weeks, days leading up to a deadline, we become really busy with inquiries, and some questions or situations are complex and require time to work through. So contacting us as early as possible will ensure we are able to get back to you with the right answer. So we're moving towards the end of our presentation, and I'd like to share with you some helpful resources before we let you go. So while the portal itself is a really excellent resource for information, we encourage you to consult the following links. Um, as an applicant, you will need to create a new account in the updated system. So you can use the first link entitled CGMS Portal to get started. If you had an account with us before, it'll be really important to use the same email when creating your new account to ensure that your history and information is properly migrated. The link Guidance and Resources provides a comprehensive user guide for applying for funding opportunities, managing your account, navigating the portal, and participating as a peer assessor. So this is really an excellent section to find a wealth of resources. We also have tips and guidance on how to prepare your CV available on our website. as well as a dedicated section where we're providing updates on the recent changes and new changes coming down. Um, so that section is called Updates, Funding Opportunities, and Portal. So you can be sure to return to that regularly for new information. You can also subscribe to our e-bulletin and receive updates and important news directly in your inbox. This first link here will guide you to the designated spot on our website where you can sign up. I'll also remind everyone we have the deadlines and notification of results section on our website, which gives you all the deadlines and turnaround times for the various grants offered here at the Canada Council. And if you enjoyed this webinar, you can click on the webinars and information section link to see more information on upcoming webinars, including the webinar on microgrants scheduled for early October. And if you have any questions about your application or just questions in general, don't hesitate to get in touch. Here is our contact information. For general inquiries about the Canada Council, the portal, or issues related to your account, such as password or login difficulties, you can contact our team at info@canadacouncil.ca. If you have international residency specific questions or questions regarding your application, you can contact us at artsabroad@canadacouncil.ca, and a member of our team will get back to you as quickly as we can. This concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found this information useful. I would also like to thank our colleagues who helped to organize this webinar, Stephanie Mayville and Alyssa Scott, working diligently behind the scenes, as well as our American Sign Language interpreters, Dean Webb and Carolyn Carter. As mentioned earlier, we will be sending out the PDF of the slides to all registered attendees, so you can expect this in the coming days. And we hope you have a beautiful weekend and good luck on your next application. Thank you so much.